The council fire threw shadows against the hide walls. Smoke curled upward through the opening at the peak, carrying the scent of sage and cedar
I'm here.
into the winter
I
night.
know, I'm just
30
scared.
warriors
We'll
sat in a
face it
circle,
together.
their breath visible in the cold air.
Warriors,
The
our
elders
last
wore
is called
beaded
to us
mantles
from
that
these
caught the
peaks.
firelight. At the center
Charge
stood Marcus
me!
Ironheart, his voice steady and certain. "We strike before the next snow," he said. "Pine Haven first, then Silver Creek, then Meadowbrook." Kira Ironheart rose from her place without asking permission. At 19, she stood taller than most of the warriors around her. Her skin carried the gray-green tone of her mother's people, the color of storm clouds over distant mountains. The ceremonial beadwork on her shoulders marked her as heir. The calluses on her hands marked her as warrior. "Those towns have no soldiers," she said, "only families." Marcus turned to face her. His eyes were cold. "They have our land. They have treaties with my father, agreements signed before witnesses. Your father is dying niece. His weakness dies with him." The words hung in the air like smoke. Chief Thomas Ironheart had been bedridden for 6 months, his lungs slowly filling with blood. Everyone knew. No one spoke of it. Kira's jaw tightened. Killing farmers and children is not strength. It is cruelty pretending to be courage. A murmur moved through the circle. Some warriors nodded. Others would not meet her eyes. Marcus stepped closer. The fire crackled between them. "You speak with a white tongue. Your mother was one of them. Perhaps her weakness runs in your blood." The mention of her mother was a blade across old scars. Elizabeth Hart had been a settler woman who married a chief 20 years ago. She died bringing Kira into the world. Kira had spent her entire life proving she belonged to her father's people. It had never been enough for men like Marcus. "I speak with my conscience," Kiripana said quietly. "Something you lost when you decided fear was easier to rule than trust." Marcus smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "The council will decide who rules by conscience and who rules by strength." The vote came swiftly. Exile. 18 voices for 12 against. The elders looked away. The warriors who had trained her since childhood said nothing. Marcus gave the order himself. "Take her beyond our borders. Leave her near the settler towns she loves so much. Let them save her. Or let the winter do what it will." Kira stood perfectly still. She had been raised to command warriors. She had been raised to lead. She had not been raised to beg. She walked out of the council chamber with her spine straight and her head high. Behind her, the fire continued to burn. That was 3 weeks ago. They had taken her on horseback to the edge of clan territory, stripped her of weapons, left her with nothing but the clothes she wore and the knowledge that Marcus wanted her dead. For 7 days, Kira wandered. She survived on frozen berries scraped from beneath snow, on ice melted in her mouth, on stubborn will and the training her father had given her when she was barely tall enough to hold a spear. She had been trying to reach the next settlement when the storm caught her, the real storm. Not the light snows that had fallen intermittently, but the kind of blizzard that turned the world white and erased all sense of direction. When her strength finally gave out, she had crawled the last 100 yards on instinct alone, toward lights, toward the smell of wood smoke, toward anything that suggested human warmth. She did not remember collapsing, only the cold, and then briefly a voice asking why. Why had become the question she no longer knew how to answer. Silas Thornwood stood in his workshop as the first snow began to fall. The smell of fresh-cut pine filled the air. Sawdust covered the floor in pale drifts. His hands moved over a table he had been building for 3 days, checking joints, testing corners. The wood was smooth under his fingertips, solid, reliable. His left hand trembled. It always did. 3 years ago, his niece Emma had come running into this workshop. She was 6 years old, gap-toothed, fearless. She loved watching him work, loved the smell of wood and the sound of the saw cutting clean lines through timber. He had been cutting a plank. The saw screamed. Emma ran toward him, reaching for the bright curl of shavings that fell like ribbons from the blade. Silas saw her small hands stretching toward the spinning teeth. He hesitated. 5 seconds. That was all it took. When the saw finally stopped, Emma was screaming. 2 fingers gone, blood on the sawdust. Her father, David Silas's brother, had carried her out without a word. The doctor saved her hand. The scars would last forever. David had not spoken to Silas since. Silas set down the sanding block. His left hand still shook. It shook every time he picked up a saw. Every time he came close to making a decision, the hesitation that had cost Emma her fingers now lived in his bones like a disease. He gave away most of what he made: tables, chairs, cradles for newborns. He left them on doorsteps before dawn. No notes, no names. He could not undo what he had done, but he could build things that lasted. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began falling harder, thick and silent. Silas banked the fire in the small stove at the corner of the workshop and moved toward the door. That was when he heard it. A sound. Heavy, not a knock. Something falling against the wood. He stood still listening. The wind howled, snow hissed against the windows. Then the sound came again. A scraping, slow, deliberate. Silas opened the door. Cold air struck him like a fist. Snow swirled into the workshop, melting on the warm floorboards. On the step, half buried in white, lay a shape too large to be a child and too still to be safe. A woman, her skin was the color of winter ice tinged gray-green beneath the frost. She wore leather clothing, travel-worn but well-made. Dark hair hung in a thick braid stiff with frozen blood. One arm stretched toward the door, fingers curled, as though she had dragged herself the last few feet on instinct alone. But it was not her size that made Silas freeze. It was her face. The high cheekbones, the broad features, the small tusks visible even with her lips pressed shut against the cold. Orc, Ironwood clan, the people his town had signed treaties with, the people they traded with once a year at the autumn market, the people who stayed on their side of the ridge while settlers stayed on theirs, the people David blamed for everything wrong with the territory. Silas looked down at her. Snow was already covering her shoulders. Her breath came so shallow he almost missed it, a thin cloud of vapor barely visible in the dark. If anyone saw her here, this became complicated. If he left her here, she died. His left hand trembled. He crouched beside her and slid his arms beneath her shoulders and knees. She was heavy, solid muscle even weakened as she was. He lifted her with effort, felt snow fall from her clothing in soft clumps. Her head lolled against his shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. The word was barely sound, raw, scraped thin. "I am not going to hurt you," Silas said. He did not know if she heard him. He carried her inside and shut the door against the storm. The warmth of the workshop touched her skin slowly. Silas laid her on the long workbench near the stove and began peeling back the frozen outer layers of her clothing. Bruises covered her ribs. A shallow cut near her temple had clotted poorly in the cold. But what worried him most was the hollow look of her face. The way her cheekbones stood out too sharp. This was not injury from travel. This was starvation. He fetched water, warmed it carefully over the stove, and pressed a damp cloth to her lips. At the contact, her eyes opened. Amber, clear and sharp despite the exhaustion that lined her face. Panic flared there for half a heartbeat. Her hand jerked toward her belt. No weapon remained. "You are in my workshop," Silas said evenly. "You collapsed outside. I brought you in. That is all." She stared at him as if trying to measure truth from tone alone. "Why?" The word came rough, broken. "Because it is winter and you were dying." Her brow furrowed slightly as though the answer made no sense, as though kindness required explanation. Silas moved to the stove and ladled thin broth from the pot he had been heating for his own dinner. He brought it back and held the bowl steady. "You can argue with me after you stop shaking." She hesitated, pride fighting survival. Then her hands rose slow and controlled and took the bowl. She drank carefully, not greedy, not desperate. Every movement measured as if even hunger had rules that must be followed. Silas noticed the way she held herself, the straightness of her spine despite weakness, the precision in how her fingers gripped the bowl. This was not a farmer's daughter, not a traveler caught in bad weather. This was someone raised with discipline. He saw it then, on her right wrist, half hidden beneath grime and dried blood. Ink marks, delicate lines forming a pattern he did not recognize at first glance. Not decorative, deliberate. She followed his gaze instantly. Her fingers curled inward, hiding the marks. "You saw nothing," she said. Her voice carried command now, despite the rasp. Silas leaned back in his chair. "I saw someone left to starve outside my door. That is all I need to see." Outside, snow continued to fall. It would bury her tracks, erase any evidence of how she had reached his workshop. Neither of them knew it yet, but by morning riders would already be searching. And the woman shivering beside his fire was not simply an exile. She was blood of the Ironwood throne. Morning came gray and quiet. The storm had passed, leaving Pine Haven buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. The world looked clean, deceptive. Silas had slept in the chair near the stove, one ear tuned to the sound of her breathing. When he opened his eyes, she was already awake, sitting upright on the edge of the workbench, watching him, not startled, not confused, assessing. The firelight caught in her amber eyes. Even weakened, she carried herself like someone accustomed to space being made for her. Not arrogance, expectation. She had rewrapped the wound on her shoulder using strips torn from the inner lining of her cloak. The work was clean, precise, medical knowledge that spoke of training. "You should have tied it tighter," she said, nodding towards the knot he had made the night before. Silas blinked, then huffed a quiet breath that might have been amusement. "Good morning to you too." She swung her legs carefully off the table and stood. The movement was controlled despite the tremor in her muscles. She was tall, taller than him by at least 2 inches. Her build was that of someone who had spent years conditioning for strength. Broad shoulders, defined arms, hands that knew how to hold weapons. "What do I call you?" Silas asked. A pause, too long to be casual. "Kira," she said finally. The name fell carefully from her tongue as though selected rather than remembered. Silas did not press. "Silas." She inclined her head slightly. The gesture was formal, almost courtly, not how exiles greeted strangers. Her gaze moved toward the door, measuring distance, calculating. "I will leave when the storm clears fully. You can barely stand. I can stand." Her grip on the edge of the table tightened for balance, even as she said it. Outside voices drifted down the street, neighbors clearing snow from their roofs and doorways. The normal sounds of a town waking after a storm. Kira's reaction was immediate. Her shoulders stiffened. Her attention snapped toward the sound like prey scenting hunters. "They are close," she murmured. "Who?" She did not answer. Instead, she moved toward the small wash basin near the back wall and began scrubbing at her hands with deliberate force, removing the last traces of dried blood and dirt. Beneath the grime, her skin showed those same faint markings Silas had seen on her wrist. Inked lines that circled like ceremonial bands. Not decoration. Symbolic. "You were not left to starve by accident," Silas said quietly. She stopped scrubbing for half a second, then resumed. "I made enemies. Not the kind that hide in forests." She gave him a dry look over her shoulder. "No, not those kind." Silas folded his arms and leaned against the wall. "You do not talk like a common traveler, Kira. And you do not ask the right questions. Try me." She turned fully then. For a flicker of a moment, the guarded mask slipped. Beneath it was something raw, something tired. "If they find me here," she said, "they will not ask politely. They will demand." "Demand what?" "My return." The weight of those words settled between them like stone. Silas thought of the ink on her wrist, the refined way she moved despite injury, the command in her voice when she forgot to hide it. "You are not just clan-born," he said slowly. Her jaw tightened. Silence confirmed more than words ever could. A sudden knock sounded at the door. Both of them froze. Silas moved first, stepping toward the door with outward calm, though his pulse quickened. Kira's gaze darted to the back window, calculating whether her strength would carry her that far. He opened the door to find Margaret Brennan standing in the snow. The baker's widow bundled in wool, her breath steaming in the cold air. "Storm hit hard," she said, peering past him with open curiosity. "You all right, Silas?" He nodded. "Roof held." Her eyes flicked inward, caught a glimpse of green-gray skin by the stove. Surprise flared in her expression, then concern. But she did not shout, did not recoil. "You always did have a habit of bringing strays inside," Margaret said softly. "Careful it does not cost you." Silas gave a small nod. "I appreciate the concern." When he closed the door, Kira was standing rigid near the back wall. "You see," she said quietly, "it begins." Silas met her gaze evenly. "Then we deal with it." She studied him again, that same look from the night before, as though trying to understand why a human carpenter would choose complication over safety. Outside, beyond the town's eastern ridge, snow shifted under heavy boots. Tracks were being followed, and somewhere not far from Pine Haven, armored riders had already found where the storm could not fully erase the trail. Kira walked back toward the stove and sat slowly, controlled despite the exhaustion that made her hands shake. If they ask, she said, not looking at him, you know nothing. Silas picked up a piece of wood and his carving knife. His left hand trembled, as it always did, but he began to work anyway. I rarely know anything useful, he said. For the first time since dawn, the corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to feel dangerous. The fire crackled. Snow melted slowly from her boots pooling on the floor. Outside, Pine Haven went about its morning routines unaware that everything was about to change. Because the exile sitting by Silas Thornwood's fire was not just a warrior. She was a princess, and her uncle, the man who had ordered her left to die in the snow, would not stop searching until she was found. By the third day, the workshop had begun to feel different. Not warmer exactly. The iron stove still struggled against the mountain cold, but something in the space had shifted, like a door left slightly open where before it had been barred shut. Kira was strong enough now to move without pain lancing through her ribs, strong enough to notice details. The way Silas arranged his tools in perfect order on the wall, saws hung by size, chisels lined up like soldiers, planes nestled in their racks. Everything had its place. Everything belonged somewhere. She understood that need, the need for order, when the world itself felt chaotic. She watched him work that morning. He was building a chair frame, measuring twice before each cut, checking angles with a square that looked older than he was. His movements were careful, methodical, but his left hand shook every time he reached for the saw. He would touch the handle, fingers trembling, then pull back and use a hand plane instead. The frame he was building had a joint that needed reinforcement, a cross brace that would take the weight when someone sat. He had cut the mortise too shallow. The tenon would not hold. Kira stood, walked to the wall where the tools hung, selected a chisel without asking. May I? Silas looked up, surprised, but he stepped back. She took the frame piece and the chisel. Her hands moved with precision. 3 cuts, cleaning the mortise deeper, squaring the corners. When she fitted the tenon in, it slid home with a soft click. Solid, immovable. Where did you learn that? Silas asked quietly. My father. The words came before she could stop them. He said wood remembers how it is treated. Respect it and it becomes strong. Force it and it breaks. Silas studied the joint, tested it with his hands. It did not budge. Your father was right. She handed him the chisel. Their fingers brushed, brief, accidental, but neither pulled away quickly. I need to attach the side rails, Silas said. Can you hold the frame steady while I drill? Kira positioned herself across from him, gripped the wood with both hands. Her strength made the frame completely immobile. Hold steady, Silas said, more to himself than to her. He began drilling. The bit cut clean holes through the hardwood. His left hand still trembled on the brace, but his right held firm. With her anchoring the piece, he could work without fear of it slipping. They fell into rhythm, him drilling, her holding, neither speaking. But the silence was not empty. It was full of sawdust floating in morning light, full of the smell of oak and maple, full of 2 people who had spent too long alone learning what it felt like to work beside someone else. When the last hole was drilled, Kira did not let go immediately. This will be a good chair, she said. It is for the church. Reverend Clayton's wife has trouble with her knees, needs something solid to stand from. You are not charging them. It was not a question. No, she released the frame. You give away most of what you make. What I can spare. Why, Silas set down the drill. His jaw worked for a moment. Then he looked at her directly. Because I cannot give back what I took. The weight in those words silenced any response she might have made. Afternoon sun cut through the workshop windows in slanted bars of gold. Dust motes danced in the light like snow that had forgotten how to fall. Silas was carving, a small project, something for his hands to do while glue dried on the chair joints. He worked a piece of cherry wood, shaping it into a butter knife. Simple, functional, the kind of thing he made without thinking. Kira sat on a stool near the stove watching. She had offered to help, but he had shaken his head. Some work needed solitude. His knife moved in smooth strokes. Curls of red wood peeled away like ribbons. The shape emerged slowly, handle first, then the broad, flat blade. He adjusted his grip. The knife slipped. It tumbled from his hands, spinning the freshly sharpened edge, catching light as it fell toward the floor. Kira moved without thinking. Her hand shot out. Fingers closed around the handle mid-air. The blade stopped an inch from the floorboards. Complete silence. Silas stared at her, at the knife held perfectly still in her grip, at the speed with which she had moved. Faster than reflex, faster than thought. Combat training. Warrior instinct. Kira looked down at the knife in her hand as though surprised to find it there. Her cheeks darkened. The green-gray of her skin took on a deeper hue. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Old habit." Silas blinked. Then something unexpected happened. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, not a forced sound, a real laugh. Deep and genuine. It came from somewhere he had forgotten existed, somewhere buried beneath 3 years of guilt and silence. "That," he said, still grinning, "is the most impressive thing I have seen all year." Kira stared at him, unsure. Then the corner of her mouth twitched. The twitch became a smile. The smile broke into laughter. She laughed like someone who had not allowed herself the luxury in a very long time. The sound filled the workshop, bright and unexpected as sunlight after storm. For 30 seconds, they were not Excel and Carpenter, not Orc and Human, not two people carrying the weight of their failures. They were just two people who had caught a falling knife and found it funny. When the laughter faded, something had changed. Some wall had cracked, not broken, just cracked enough to let light through. Kira handed him the knife handle first. "You should be more careful," she said, but her eyes still smiled. "Probably." She settled back on her stool. "What are you making butter knife for Margaret, the baker's widow who came by yesterday? You make gifts for everyone in this town." "When I can." "Why," Silas turned the cherry wood in his hands. "3 years ago, my niece Emma came to visit. She was 6, curious about everything. Loved watching me work." His thumb traced the grain of the wood. His voice stayed level, but something in his posture tightened. "I was cutting a plank. The saw was running. She came too close. I saw her hand reaching for the shavings." Kira did not move, did not speak. "I hesitated. 5 seconds, that is all. 5 seconds to decide whether to stop the blade or finish the cut." His left hand began to shake. He set the wood down. "I chose the cut, and Emma lost 2 fingers. The fire crackled. Outside, snow began falling again. Soft, silent. My brother David has not spoken to me since. He brings Emma to town sometimes. She waves. I wave back. But David looks through me like I am already dead." "The furniture," Kira said quietly. "The gifts. Cannot undo what I did, but I can build things that last, things that help instead of hurt." Silas picked up the cherry wood again. His hand still trembled, but he carved anyway. "Now I hesitate at everything. Cannot pick up a saw without shaking. Cannot make a decision without second-guessing. The one time I should have stopped and thought I did not. Now I cannot stop thinking." Kira watched him work for a long moment. Then she spoke. "You gave me food without asking who I was. You carried me inside without knowing if I was dangerous. You stood between me and that woman yesterday without hesitation. That is different." "Is it?" Silas met her eyes. "You hesitate with tools because you remember the key," Kira said, "but you do not hesitate with people. That is not weakness, that is learning." Something in her voice carried the weight of experience, of someone who had also learned hard lessons. "What did you learn?" Silas asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then that sometimes the right choice costs you everything, and you make it anyway. The snow fell heavier outside. The workshop grew darker, but neither of them moved to light the lamps yet. The next 2 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Morning came with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Kira would wake first, tend the fire, have water heating by the time Silas stirred from his chair. He had not slept in his bed since she arrived. She had stopped arguing about it. They worked together. He taught her the names of tools in English. She taught him words in her language. "This is a plane," he said, holding up the smoothing tool. She touched it carefully. "We call it Tashmara. It means that which makes level. And this," he held up a chisel, "Kenrock, the tooth that bites clean." He tried to repeat it. The pronunciation came out mangled. She laughed and corrected him. He tried again. Still wrong. They both laughed. The distance between them shrank. 10 feet became 7. 7 became 5. By the 4th day, they worked side by side without thinking about it. shoulders nearly touching, movements synchronized. She handed him tools before he asked. He steadied pieces before she needed help. They had developed a language that required no words. In the evenings, they shared meals. Simple food, bread and cheese, soup stretched with whatever vegetables remained in the root cellar. But the meals felt richer than they were, warmer. Kira began to relax. Her shoulders lost some of their tension. Her hands no longer drifted toward weapons that were not there. She smiled more easily, laughed at small things. On the fourth evening, as snow fell silent against the windows, she spoke without being asked. My mother died when I was born. Hemorrhage the midwives could not stop. My father said she chose my life over hers, made them save me instead of her. Silas listened, did not interrupt. She was human, a settler. The clan elders never fully accepted her. When she died, they saw it as proof that mixing blood was dangerous, that humans were weak. But your father kept you. He loved her, loved me. But there were always those who questioned, who looked at my lighter skin and saw betrayal. I had to be twice as strong, twice as skilled, twice as loyal, to prove you belonged. Yes, Silas refilled her cup with hot tea. Did it work? She smiled, but there was no humor in it. For a while, until I proved my loyalty went to conscience instead of tribe. He wanted to ask more, wanted to understand what had driven her into the snow, but the pain in her eyes stopped him. Some stories could not be rushed. On the fifth morning, Silas needed to go into town. Supplies were running low. Flour, salt, nails for a repair job someone had commissioned. I will be back before dark, he told Kira. She nodded. I will be fine. But after he left, the workshop felt too quiet. Kira tried to sit still, tried to rest as her body still needed. But restlessness drove her to her feet. She began organizing tools, sweeping sawdust, moving just to move. Then, without thinking, her body fell into old patterns. Combat forms. Her feet found the stance, weight balanced, hands up. She moved through the sequence she had practiced 10,000 times. Strike, block, turn, sweep. Each movement precise, economical, deadly. She had been training since she was 8 years old. Her father had insisted, if they question your place, show them you are stronger, faster, better. She had become all of those things, and it had not been enough. She stopped mid-form, breathing hard, not from exertion, from the memory of what that strength had cost her. Through the window, movement caught her eye. Riders, 4 of them, moving slowly down the main street of Pinehaven. They wore heavy furs against the cold, but beneath those furs, she saw the leather and metal of ironwood armor. Clan warriors, searching. Kira pressed herself against the wall beside the window, hard hammering. One of the riders turned his head, scanning buildings. She saw the cut of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. Drake, her father's captain, a man who had trained her, who had taught her to hold a spear when she was barely tall enough to lift one. He was looking for her. The riders did not stop. They moved through town slowly, methodically, asking questions she could not hear, searching faces. After they passed, Kira allowed herself to breathe again. They were close, too close, and they would not stop until they found her. She moved away from the window and sat on the stool by the cold stove. Her hands shook, not from fear, from the knowledge of what was coming. They would find her. And when they did, Silas would be implicated. The kind carpenter who had saved her life would become the settler who harbored an exile, who aided a traitor. Marcus would not forgive that. She should leave, now, before Silas returned, disappear into the mountains and take her danger with her. But as she looked around the workshop, at the chair frame they had built together, at the tools now organized, the way she had arranged them, at the small space that had become something like safety, she knew she could not. Not yet, not without saying goodbye. The afternoon light faded. Snow began to fall again. Kira sat by the window and watched the street, waiting for riders to return, waiting for Silas to come home, waiting for the moment when she would have to choose between staying and keeping him safe. Outside, the temperature dropped. Night was coming, and with it, decisions that could not be delayed any longer. When Silas finally walked through the door, arms full of supplies, Kira was standing by the window. She did not turn to greet him. They are here, she said quietly. Your town. They are searching for me. Silas set down the supplies carefully. How many? 4, maybe more by now. Did they see you? No, Tom. He walked to stand beside her at the window. The street was empty now. just snow falling through lamplight. What happens when they find you? He asked. Kira finally turned to look at him. In the dim light, her amber eyes seemed to glow. They take me back, and they make sure I do not speak against my uncle again. They will kill you. Eventually, after a trial, after I am publicly shamed, after Marcus has used my execution to consolidate his power. Silas's jaw tightened. And if you run, he declares that humans harbored a traitor, that Pine Haven conspired against Ironwood clan. Your town burns. So staying gets you killed, running gets us killed. Yes, the fire in the stove had burned low, the workshop was growing cold, but neither of them moved to add wood. There is a third option, Silas said finally. What? You face them, but not alone. Kira shook her head. You do not understand what you are offering. This is not your fight. You collapsed outside my door. I chose to open it. That made it my fight. Silas, hold steady, he said quietly. She stopped, looked at him. That is what you told me when we were building the chair. Hold steady. So hold steady now. Let me help. In the gathering dark with snow falling silent outside and danger drawing closer with every hour, Kira felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope, small, fragile, but real. They will come tomorrow, she said, or the day after. And when they do, we will be ready. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to save himself, but the steadiness in his voice stopped her. He had hesitated once. It had cost him everything. He was not hesitating now, and somehow that made all the difference. They came at dawn on the 6th day. Silas heard the horses before he saw them. 3 sets of hooves on packed snow, steady, deliberate, not the casual pace of travelers. This was purpose. He moved to the window. Through the gray morning light, he saw them. 3 riders in heavy furs, but the leather armor beneath was unmistakable. Ironwood clan markings on the saddle blankets. Weapons secured but visible. At the center rode a man with a scar cutting diagonal across his jaw. Old, deliberate. The kind of mark that came from ritual, not battle. Kira appeared at his shoulder. She had not slept. He knew because he had not slept either. They had spent the night preparing, planning, knowing this moment would come. Captain Drake, she said quietly, my father's first captain. He trained me. Will he kill you? No, but he will take me to someone who will. The riders stopped outside the workshop. Drake dismounted first. His movements were controlled. A man who had spent decades making every gesture count. Inside his mind, a different conversation played. One that had happened 3 weeks ago in the council chamber after Kira had been dragged away. He had stood before Marcus. Alone. The other warriors would not meet his eyes. This is murder, Drake had said, voice low, controlled. Exile in winter, stripped of weapons. You are sending her to die. Marcus had smiled. I am sending her to find the mercy she believes settlers possess. If they save her, she was right. If they do not, the matter resolves itself. The elders will question this. The elders voted. Under pressure, under threat, under leadership. Marcus had stepped closer. You trained her well, Captain. Made her strong, made her stubborn, made her believe honor mattered more than survival. That was your mistake. Drake had held his ground. Honor does matter. Then honor your regent or join her in exile. Drake had walked away, failure bitter in his mouth. He had taught Kira to be strong, but he had failed to protect her when strength was not enough. He would not fail her again. Stay inside, Silas said, pulling Drake from memory. No. Kira, if I hide, you become complicit. If I face him, you are simply a man who showed mercy. I am complicit the moment I open that door. She looked at him. Something in her eyes softened. Then we faced this together. The knock came, firm, authoritative. Not asking permission, announcing arrival. Silas opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Drake stood on the threshold, flanked by 2 younger warriors. His eyes were gray as winter sky. They swept past Silas and found Kira standing in the center of the workshop. Recognition flared in Drake's expression. Not surprise, confirmation. Princess Kira, he said in Orcish. The title hung in the air like smoke. Silas's head snapped toward her. Princess, not exile, not traveler, princess. Kira stepped forward, Spine straight, shoulders back, every inch the royalty Drake had named her. Captain, she replied in the same language. Drake switched to English, for Silas's benefit, or perhaps to make the moment official. Witnessed. By order of Regent Marcus Ironheart, you are summoned to return to Ironwood territory, to face council judgment for crimes of treason and conspiracy against your people. I committed no treason, Kira said. Her voice carried steel now. The voice of someone raised to command. I opposed murder disguised as strategy. That is not for you to determine. It was for me to speak, and I spoke truth. Drake's jaw tightened, a muscle jumped. Something flickered in his eyes. The memory of his own failure, his own inability to stand when it mattered. Behind him, the two younger warriors shifted, uncertain. This was not a simple retrieval. This was something more complicated. Silas stepped forward, positioned himself slightly in front of Kira, not blocking her, just present. She stays, he said. All three Ironwood warriors looked at him. Drake's expression did not change, but one eyebrow lifted slightly. This does not concern you, settler. She collapsed outside my door. I gave her shelter, food. That makes it my concern. You harbor royalty accused of treason. I harbored someone dying in the snow. I did not ask for credentials first. The corner of Drake's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but his eyes remained hard. The Regent expected confirmation of death by now. Your survival complicates matters, Princess. Good, Kira said. Let him be complicated. Drake's gaze shifted between them, calculating. You understand what you risk, Carpenter. If you stand with her, you stand against Ironwood clan, against the Regent's authority. I understand I made a choice 6 days ago. I do not unmake it now. Silence settled over the threshold. Snow had begun to fall again. Light, tentative. Drake turned to his warriors. Wait outside. They hesitated, then obeyed. When they were alone, Drake stepped fully into the workshop and closed the door behind him. The space suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. Speak plainly, Kira, he said, dropping formality. What happened at council? Marcus presented a plan to attack 3 settler towns, Pine Haven included, to strike before spring and to claim territory through force. Strategic expansion. Murder of farmers and children. I opposed. I cited our treaties, our agreements with these people. And Marcus called me weak, said my human blood made me traitor, convinced enough elders to vote for exile. Her voice hardened, then ordered me abandoned in winter, near the very towns he plans to destroy. If I died, it would be seen as natural. If I lived, he could claim I fled to conspire with humans. Drake listened without interruption. His face revealed nothing, but his hands had moved to rest on his belt, no longer near his weapons. Your father, Chief Thomas, does he know? My father is dying. Marcus controls what he hears, what he knows. A long pause, then Drake exhaled slowly. You always were too honest for politics, girl. I learned from you. You taught me honor mattered more than victory. I taught you that in the training circle, not the council chamber. The principle does not change. Drake looked at Silas, really looked at him. And you, Carpenter, you know what she is now. Royal blood of Ironwood. If she returns, she likely dies. If she stays, war may come to your door. Why not send her away? Protect yourself. Silas met his gaze. His left hand was shaking. It always shook when stakes were high, but his voice was steady. Because 3 years ago I hesitated when I should not have. It cost my niece 2 fingers. I have lived with that hesitation every day since. I will not hesitate again. Not when someone needs help. Not when what is right it is clear. Drake studied him for a long moment. Then he turned back to Kira. There is one path that does not end in immediate blood. What path? Ancient council law. If an heir invokes it, they have right to speak before judgment. Public testimony, witnessed by elders of both clan and any allied parties. The settler treaties, Kira said slowly, still stand. Pine Haven has elder council. If you invoke public trial, Marcus must allow it or break sacred law. He cannot afford to break sacred law. Not while your father still lives. The elders would revolt. Hope flared in Kira's eyes, fragile but real. And if I testify, if I speak truth before witnesses, then Marcus must answer. The clan must decide, not just him. He will still have power. He could still attack. But not without question, not without challenge. You will not win back your throne, girl. But you might prevent a war. Silas stepped closer to Kira. It is a chance. She looked at him, then at Drake. When dawn tomorrow, I will make arrangements. Bring both councils together. Neutral ground outside Pine Haven. Will they come? I will make sure they come. Drake moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. His voice dropped lower. I failed you at council, Kira. Stood silent when I should have spoken. Let Marcus intimidate the vote. I will not fail you again. Something passed between them. Captain and student. Guilt and forgiveness unspoken. Your father would be proud, Drake continued. What you did at council, standing for principle over power. He raised you well. Her throat worked. No words came. Drake left without ceremony. The two younger warriors followed. Their hoofbeats faded into morning silence. When they were gone, Kira turned to Silas. Her composure cracked, not breaking, just cracking enough to show the fear beneath. Tomorrow I stand before those who exiled me, before Marcus, before witnesses from your town. I speak truth and hope it is enough. It will be enough. You do not know that. No, Silas admitted, but I know you, and I know truth has power they cannot silence. She moved to the window, looked out at the snow-covered street, at the town she had been meant to destroy. Why, she asked quietly, why do you believe in me? Silas walked to stand beside her, not touching, just present. You want to know what I see when I look at you? She did not answer, did not turn. I see someone who gave up everything for conscience, someone who chose exile over compromise, someone who could have stayed silent and kept power, but spoke anyway. He paused, searched for words. I see someone who fixed my furniture without asking, who laughed at a falling knife, who taught me words in a language I will never master. I see someone who has been carrying the weight of the world alone for so long, they forgot what it felt like to share it. Kira's shoulders trembled, just slightly. I see someone who is stronger than she knows, not because of her training, not because of her blood, because she chose right when wrong was easier. She turned to face him. Tears traced lines down her gray-green cheeks, the first tears he had seen her shed. I do not know how to be anything but what they made me. Then be that, but be it here with people who see you, not just your title. The distance between them was less than a foot, close enough to feel the warmth of another person, close enough to matter. Kira reached out, took his left hand, the one that always trembled. Your hand shakes because you care too much, she said softly. Not because you failed. You carry Emma's pain because you have a good heart. That is not weakness. Under her touch, the trembling slowed, then stopped. They stood like that, two people who had found each other in a snowstorm, who had built chairs and shared laughter and learned what trust felt like when it was freely given. Tomorrow, Silas said, we face them together. Together, she agreed. Outside, night began to fall. Snow turned blue in the fading light. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Marcus was learning his niece still lived, that his carefully constructed narrative was unraveling. And in a small workshop in Pine Haven, two people who should have been strangers prepared to stand before powers greater than themselves, armed with nothing but truth. Dawn came cold and clear. No clouds, no wind, just pale light spreading across snow that had frozen overnight into a hard crust. They gathered at the boundary stone, the ancient marker that separated Ironwood territory from settler land. Neutral ground by treaty, sacred ground by tradition. On one side, Ironwood warriors formed a line, 20 strong, armor polished, weapons present but not drawn. At their center stood Marcus Ironheart. Even from a distance, his presence dominated. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the ceremonial beadwork of Regent, silver threads caught the dawn light. On the other side, Pine Haven's town council, Mayor Sutton, Reverend Clayton, Margaret Brennan and a dozen others, farmers and merchants, people who had built lives in this valley and wanted to keep them. Between them, a circle of stones, old, placed generations ago when the first treaties were signed. This was where grievances were heard, where truth was meant to prevail over power. Kira walked toward the circle. She wore her travel-worn leather. No ceremonial dress, no armor, just herself. But she walked like royalty, head high, spine straight, each step measured. Silas walked beside her. He had argued against it. This was clan business. He would make her look weak. She had refused to let him stay behind. You stood for me when no one else would, she had said. I will not hide that now. As they reached the circle, Marcus stepped forward. His smile was cold, calculated. Niece, you should have stayed dead. Uncle, you should have stayed honorable. Murmurs rippled through the Ironwood warriors. No one spoke to the regent like that, not publicly. Marcus's smile did not waver. You stand accused of treason, of conspiracy against your people, of abandoning your blood for settlers' sympathies. I stand accused of conscience, of refusing to murder children. If that is treason, then I am guilty. The town council shifted, uncertain. This was not what they had expected. Not defiance, not this raw honesty. Elder Ruth Stormcloud stepped forward from the Ironwood side, gray-braided, ancient. She had been advisor to 3 chiefs before Thomas. Her word carried weight even Marcus could not fully dismiss. The heir has invoked ancient law, Ruth said. Her voice cut through the cold air. She has right to speak, to present truth, to be heard. She has no rights, Marcus said. She was exiled by council vote. Exile does not erase blood. The law is clear, Marcus. Or do you challenge tradition? A dangerous question. To challenge tradition was to challenge the foundation of clan authority itself. Marcus could not afford that, not with his own claim to power still dependent on his brother's failing health. Let her speak then, Marcus said. Let her condemn herself with her own words. Kira stepped into the center of the stone circle, alone now. Silas had stopped at the edge. This part was hers. She turned slowly, meeting eyes, Ironwood warriors who had trained her, town council members who had seen her as enemy, all watching, all judging. 3 weeks ago, she began, I stood before council. My uncle presented a plan to attack 3 settler towns before spring, Pine Haven, Silver Creek, Meadowbrook. Her voice carried clear across the frozen ground. He called it strategic expansion, necessary for clan survival. He said we needed to strike before they grew stronger, before they took more land. She paused, let the words settle. I asked him how many warriors these towns had, how many soldiers, how many trained fighters. He said it did not matter. That strength was not about fighting soldiers. It was about taking territory, showing dominance. Mayor Sutton stepped forward slightly. We have no soldiers, just families, farmers. Marcus's eyes flashed. You encroach on our hunting grounds. You build on our ancestral lands. Under treaty, Kira cut in, signed by my father, by your brother, agreements made in good faith. We trade with these people. We benefit from their goods. Their medicine has treated our sick. Treaties made in weakness, Marcus said. Treaties made in wisdom. Their eyes locked. Uncle and niece, regent and heir. The real conflict laid bare. I oppose the raids, Kira continued, not because I favor humans over my people, but because slaughtering farmers does not make us strong. It makes us feared, and fear is not the same as respect. She turned to the Ironwood warriors. How many of you have lost brothers, sisters, fathers, to border skirmishes, to raids and counter-raids, to a cycle of violence that has lasted 3 generations? Several warriors looked down, others held her gaze. She saw grief there, recognition. My uncle wants war because war is simple. It requires no negotiation, no compromise, no difficult conversations, just enemies and allies. Black and white. But the world is not black and white. It is complicated, messy, hard, and yes, sometimes that means choosing peace when war would be easier. Marcus laughed, sharp and cold. You speak like a child, like someone who has never faced real threat, real danger. I faced exile. I faced death in the snow. I survived because a human carpenter showed more honor than my own blood. She pointed toward Silas. Every eye turned to him. That man knew what I was, knew helping me was dangerous, knew it could cost him everything. He helped anyway, because it was right, because I needed it. Her voice rose, stronger now, certain. That is what strength looks like. Not burning homes, not killing children, making the hard choice to show mercy when violence is easier. Silence fell. Ruth Stormcloud stepped into the circle. The air speaks truth. I was present at the council meeting. I heard the regent's plan. It did indeed target civilian settlements. Marcus turned on her. Those targets were strategic. They were defenseless. That is war. That is slaughter. And there is a difference. More murmurs, louder now, warriors conferring in low voices. The unity Marcus had built was cracking. Just slightly, but visible. Mayor Sutton cleared his throat. The treaties stand. My town honors them. We have no quarrel with Ironwood clan. We seek only to live in peace. Peace is not survival, Marcus said. It is stagnation. Perhaps, Kira said quietly, but survival without honor is not worth the cost. Ruth raised her hand. Council must decide. This matter goes beyond exile. Beyond one voice, the heir has spoken. The regent has spoken. Now the people choose. Choose what? Marcus demanded. Whether the exile stands, whether we honor ancient law, whether we continue as we have been, or whether we change. The decision hung in the cold morning air. Warriors whispered to each other. Elders conferred. The town council waited, barely breathing. Finally, Ruth spoke. The exile is revoked. Blood cannot be severed without full consensus. That consensus was not properly taken. Marcus's jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. However, Ruth continued, Kira Ironheart cannot return to Ironwood territory without reconciliation. Her words have caused division. Until clan unity is restored, she remains apart. She is exile in spirit, if not in law, Marcus said, claiming victory. Yes, Ruth agreed, but she lives, and she speaks truth that must be heard. She turned to face the gathered crowd, both sides. Marcus Ironheart retains regency, but his authority is questioned. At the next full moon gathering, the clan will vote. Confidence or challenge. The people will decide if his leadership serves us well. Shock rippled through the Ironwood ranks. A vote of confidence. Marcus could lose power without Thomas dying. The precedent was staggering. And Kira Ironheart, Ruth continued, is granted seat on advisory council, no longer heir, not yet leader, but voice, one that must be heard. It was compromise, not victory for either side. Kira kept her life but lost her home. Marcus kept his power but faced challenge, the kind of messy, complicated solution that peace required. Marcus stared at Kira across the stone circle, fury barely contained behind his eyes. This is not over, he said quietly, only she could hear. No, she agreed, but it is not yours to control anymore. He turned sharply, mounted his horse, but he did not ride immediately. Marcus sat in the saddle looking down at the boundary stone, at the warriors who had followed him without question. Some still did, but others looked uncertain, questioning. He had built his authority on strength, on certainty, on the promise that he alone could protect the clan from a dangerous world. Kira had just shown them another way. Messy, difficult, but possible. He would not forget this. His gaze found Silas, the carpenter who had changed everything by opening a door. A nobody who had somehow made his niece stronger by simply treating her like a person rather than a weapon. Marcus would remember that too. He rode back toward Ironwood territory without another word. Half the warriors followed immediately. The other half remained, uncertain, watching Kira, watching the town council, calculating their own positions. The divide had become visible. When the Ironwood delegation finally dispersed, Kira stood alone in the circle. Neither side had fully accepted her. Neither side had fully won, but she was alive. Silas approached slowly, stopped at the circle's edge. You did it, he said. I survived. That is not the same as winning. It is today. She looked at him, exhausted, relieved, lost. What happens now? Now, Silas said, you rest, you heal, you decide what comes next. I have nowhere to go. You have here if you want it. The offer hung between them. Simple, honest, no promises of forever. Just now, just this moment. Kira nodded slowly. I want it. Marcus did not return to Ironwood territory immediately. He stopped at the ridge overlooking Pinehaven, alone. His warriors had continued ahead following orders to report to the council chambers. The town spread below him. small, insignificant. Yet from this place had come the challenge to everything he had built. His hands gripped the reins until leather creaked against his palms. She had survived. That should have been impossible. He had arranged her exile carefully, stripped her of weapons, ensured she would be left far enough from shelter that the cold would take her before she could reach help. But worse than survival was what she had done with it. She had spoken, and they had listened, the warriors questioning him now, the elders demanding a vote. Even Ruth, who had always been cautious, had stepped forward to challenge his authority, all because his niece had found a carpenter willing to feed her. Marcus studied the workshop on the edge of town. Smoke rose from its chimney. Through the window he could see movement. Kira and the settler, working, building something together. That was the real danger. Not her testimony, not her words, her example. She had shown the clan that cooperation with humans was possible, that mercy from a settler was real, that peace might work where war was certain. If Thomas died while this question still hung in the air, the vote would go against Marcus. The clan would choose Kira's way, and everything he had planned would crumble. He needed Thomas to live long enough for this to fade, for warriors to remember why they needed strength, for fear to override hope, or he needed Kira to make a mistake, to prove that her way was naive, dangerous, that humans could not be trusted. Marcus turned his horse north, back toward clan territory, back toward the council chambers where he would begin rebuilding what his niece had damaged. This was not over. Not by half. He would wait. He would watch. And when the moment came when Kira or her carpenter made the inevitable error, he would be ready. The ridge wind blew cold against his face. Below Pine Haven continued its daily life, unaware that the man watching from above had just declared a different kind of war. One fought not with weapons, but with patience. And Marcus Ironheart had always been a patient man. 6 months passed. Winter released its grip. Snow melted into streams that ran full and fast down the mountains. Spring came tentative at first, then bold. Green pushed through thawed earth. Birds returned. Pine Haven changed. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly, but real. Ironwood traders began stopping at the market, cautious at first. But when they were welcomed, when transactions were fair, when no one raised weapons, they came more often. Kira taught woodworking classes to town children, showed them techniques her father had taught her, how to read grain, how to respect the material, how to build things that lasted. She worked alongside Silas in the workshop, not as guest, as partner. They built furniture together, took commissions, split profits fairly. They did not marry, did not speak of love. That felt too simple, too neat. What they had was deeper, quieter. Partnership built on shared work and mutual respect. On laughter over mistakes and satisfaction in work well done. On a late spring afternoon, the workshop door opened. A man stood in the doorway, familiar. Silas looked up from the table he was sanding. David, his brother. They had not spoken in 3 years, not since Emma's accident, not since the 5 seconds of hesitation that had cost her 2 fingers. David held Emma's hand. She was 9 now, taller, still gap-toothed when she smiled, still fearless. Silas, David said, his voice rough with disuse. David. Silence stretched, awkward, heavy with years of hurt. Then Emma pulled away from her father, ran to Silas, wrapped her arms around his waist. Uncle Silas, Papa said we could visit. Silas's throat tightened. He looked at David. His brother's eyes were wet. I am sorry, David said. I blamed you for so long, but I was wrong. I hesitated. I cost her. You made a mistake, one mistake, and I punished you for 3 years. That was not justice, that was cruelty. Emma turned to Kira, who had been working quietly at the far bench. The girl showed no fear, just curiosity. You are Kira, Emma said. The orc princess. Just Kira now. Emma walked closer, studied her. You have scars too. Kira nodded. Yes, many. Do they hurt? Only when I forget why I earned them. Emma held up her right hand, 2 fingers gone. Scarred, puckered, and old. Mine hurts sometimes. When it is cold, Papa says that is normal. It is, but they do not hurt it all the time. And I can still build things. Papa taught me. I made a birdhouse last month. Kira smiled, genuine warmth. That is good. Building things is important work. Emma looked between Kira and Silas. Are you staying here in Pine Haven? For now. Good. Papa says Uncle Silas needs help, says he works too much alone. David stepped forward, extended his hand to Silas. I cannot undo the silence, but I can end it, if you will let me. Silas took his brother's hand, pulled him into an embrace. Both men held on longer than was comfortable, making up for years with pressure and presence. When they finally separated, David turned to Kira. Thank you for helping him remember who he was. He never forgot, Kira said. He just needed to forgive himself. They stayed for an hour. Emma chattered about school and friends and the birdhouse she was so proud of. David and Silas talked carefully at first, then with growing ease, rebuilding what had been broken. Before they left, Emma asked Silas to teach her to carve. Small things, like you make. Next week, Silas promised, we will start with butter knives, simple, useful. Can Kira teach too? Silas looked at Kira. She nodded. Yes, he said, we will teach you together. After they left the workshop, settled back into comfortable quiet, Silas returned to his sanding, Kira to her carving, but something had shifted, some weight had lifted. Your hand, Kira said after a while, what about it? It is not shaking. Silas looked down. His left hand moved steady across the wood. No tremor, no fear. He met Kira's eyes. Hold steady, she said softly. The words they had shared that first day working together, the phrase that had become their anchor. Hold steady, he agreed. Evening came gentle. Light faded from gold to blue to violet. Stars emerged one by one. In the workshop, two people worked side by side, building, creating, existing in the space they had carved out together. Not perfect, not simple, but real. Outside, the world continued. Marcus still held power in Ironwood territory. Tension still existed. The future remained uncertain. But in Pine Haven, in a workshop that smelled of sawdust and possibility, two people who had found each other in a snowstorm had learned what it meant to truly be found. Not through grand gestures or declarations, but through shared work, quiet laughter, and the steady knowledge that when morning came, they would face it together. Hold steady, it was enough.